Inflation Reduction Act, which passed and became law on August 16th of 2022. This bill includes upwards of $369 billion for energy security and climate change, which is the single largest investment in climate in our country's history. This bill helps us get 4/5 of the way towards President Biden's climate goal, which is to reduce our country's emissions by 50% by 2030, which would put us on path to help the world meet our 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming target. The bill also invests upwards of $60 billion in to disadvantaged communities, which includes low-income communities, communities of color, and rural communities, and tribal and indigenous nations. The Inflation Reduction Act makes a huge investment in electrification, which is the process of switching from fossil fuel powered appliances and machines towards zero emission versions of those technologies as well. And it makes those investments through tax credits, rebates, grants, low cost financing, and manufacturing incentives. So it really covers all the full scale of or every level of our economy. So there's consumer facing rebates and incentives, there's manufacturing, and then there's some midstream incentives as well. That's all that I will cover, because I think Amneh is going to go into more depth. But the last thing I'll say is to learn more about what you and your family and friends, how you all can benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. You can check out the calculator that our organization put out about a month ago, and put in a few pieces of information, and it spits out the various incentives that you would qualify for and help you plan your electrification journey. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jamal, for this overview. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions about that. So let's move to Michael. Please tell us about, well, so many things we want to hear from you. Just the high level about what Fresh Energy has done in regards to moving into implementation. How can local and state organizations and individuals work together? What have been some best practices thus far for implementation, and what are some best practices to navigate state energy offices and federal funding opportunities, and immediate call to action? Thank you.
So Huda, thank you for welcoming me and inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody at the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition today, and just give a few high-level thoughts about the opportunity here. I really do appreciate how carefully Jamal laid out the map, because I'll be referring to several other things that Jamal mentioned. You know, my first overarching comment is just to remind everybody, you know, how important equitable decarbonization of our buildings and our homes, our commercial buildings, our neighborhoods, just how important that is given the climate emergency that we're facing. You know, over the last 30 years, Fresh Energy's done a lot of its primary work on trying to figure out how to get all the fossil fuels out of our electric supply. And then maybe a decade ago, we started working on how do we figure out how to get all the fossil fuels out of our transportation systems. And now we're so rolled up our sleeves and completely focused on how do we get carbon out of our buildings and our built environment and our homes and our neighborhoods. It's the hardest part of the problem, I think, with maybe the possible exception of heavy industry is maybe even a little harder. But just to remind everybody that what the nations of the world came together at the Paris Climate Accords in 2015, and they agreed that we're going to get serious about this, and each country might have a different pace, and each country might have a different commitment, and each country might move at a different rate. But what everybody agreed on, every single country agreed on, is that by the middle of the century, emissions have to be zero, and that we need to get on the track to get to zero. We need to get started now, and we need to move fast. And the President of the United States, President Biden, he went to the follow-up meeting of the Paris Climate Accord, which happened in Glasgow, Scotland last year. And he said, well, America will do its fair share. We'll do our part of this deal. We'll cut our emissions in half, or a little more than half, before the end of this decade. And Jamal mentioned that. And I just want to point out that when everybody heard that in the science community, in the advocacy community, and the justice community, everybody said, wow, finally a president is committed to what we actually need to do. That's actually the exact right ambition. Cut our emissions as America totally in half yet this decade. But it's going to be hard in the building sector unless we have organizations like Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition and all its members leading the way. It's sort of obvious how to get the carbon out of the electric supply, and it's getting more obvious how to get the carbon out of cars. But getting carbon out of buildings that are dependent on natural gas is a harder, more difficult problem. So I just want to say that all serious people now everywhere in the world, doesn't matter where you are, where you live, what kind of perspective you have, but all serious people now know that global climate change is our challenge, our generation, and along with the justice and inclusion and equity, solving the world's climate problem is really humankind's biggest challenge. And getting to half, getting our emissions down by half just in the next 7 years is really an incredibly big lift. But what's amazing about this Inflation Reduction Act, and Jamal already said this as well, is if this rolls out as it should and does what it is expected to do, it's going to get us about 80% of the way there. And you hear everybody say there's $369 billion for climate tax credits and rebates and manufacturing incentives and grants, $369 billion. But I always like to point out to people that that 369 is just an estimate that Congress made as to how big it would be. But 2/3 of all of these incentives have no cap on them. They're basically dependent on how we get our act together, how we get organized, how we can deploy these technologies. And let me be really clear about that. There's no limit on how many rebates can go out in America for heat pumps in low-income homes. There's no limitation on how many heat pumps can be funded at 100% or at 50%. There's only a limitation on how organized we get. There's no limitation on how many solar farms can be built. There's no limitation on how many rooftops can get solar panels. There's no limitation on how many electric vehicles can be sold. So these incentives, 2/3 of all the incentives in the bill are uncapped, no limit, no upper bound, no. The money doesn't run out. The money doesn't run out. Just people can get the incentive as long as they continue to deploy these technologies. So there was an article in the Atlantic by Robinson Meyer a couple of weeks ago that a group called Credit Suisse did an analysis, and they thought that the 369 was a very, very, very low estimate, and the federal spending on this would be at least twice as much. And remember, this is all leveraging private investment. So, when you put in the heat pump, private person is investing some of their money, and then there's an incentive that matches it. So the total amount going into the clean energy economy over the next 10 years is going to be maybe over $1.5 or $1.75 trillion, not $369 billion. So grants, rebates, credits, tax credits, manufacturing incentives, all this stuff is really a transformative moment for the American economy to align it behind justice and climate action. we're not going to get another chance like this in our lifetime. This is the big deal. The President of the United States and, you know, every single Democrat in the House and every single Democrat in the Senate teamed up to get this bill across the finish line. And what they're doing is they're transforming our economy for local manufacturing, domestic installers, local installers, materials made here, jobs made here, opportunity for small businesses to grow, for heat pump installers and window replacement companies and weatherization companies and people working in all those industries. I just want people to realize that this is going to be very, very, very different than, remember back when President Obama passed the stimulus bill, everyone was always talking that it had to be shovel ready, it had to be shovel ready, they had to get the money out right now. This money extends over a 10-year period. All these incentives are in place through 2032. And whereas the tax credits are not as accessible or useful to some low-income families or under-resourced households, the rebates are going to be, you know, focused on, you know, average 50 and 80% of the adjusted median income of each zip code. And so those programs are going to take a while to figure out exactly how they work. So no one should have any fear of missing out. It's not like this program is going to happen and it's going to be gone. This program is going to take a while to figure out, the rebates program. It's going to be administered by the state energy audits, state energy offices and tribal communities. So the states and the tribes are going to be the direct administrators of these programs. And I guess my main message is that everyone should figure out how to roll up their sleeves with your organization or your church group or your nonprofit or your community development corporation. You know, make sure that the state energy office where you live and work and you're active, make sure they know that you want to be at the table in designing how these programs work. That is really my most important message. Is the program's not going to start, you know, tomorrow morning and then going to be gone in 18 months. It might take them 18 months to figure out all the rules of the program, and then it's going to be around for over a decade. So this is like a long-term play for your organization. It's like a long-term play for the economy. It's like a long-term deep investment in our communities. And, you know, when we use the phrase Justice40, we are expecting our leaders and our government to commit that 40% of these resources come into underserved communities. But I want underserved communities to be at the table to shape and design and make sure these programs are positioned in a way that people really truly get served. You know, we have a really close friend in the neighborhood, Metric Giles, that maybe he's on today at Community Revitalization, Community Stabilization. He says, you know, we have to be able to navigate these programs. And not everybody in the neighborhood knows as much about this as Fresh Energy does. Not everybody knows what the state energy office knows. We got to have clear navigation pathways for how people, you know, get a home energy audit. You know, how people learn that they can heat their water without fossil fuels. They learn that they can heat their home without fossil fuels. They learn what incentives are available and what contractors are qualified. You know, it's going to take a while. I mean, if you pick up the phone now and call 3 heating and ventilating contractors and ask them if they can give you a price on a heat pump water heater, I bet you $1, three contractors will say, I don't know what that is. Why don't you just want a natural gas water heater? So our communities are going to have to educate our state leaders. Our communities are going to have to educate the industry. Our communities are going to pull this money into the community. But it's a long, long game. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's a long game. So think of it as, I mean, you know, if this Credit Suisse is right, if the federal incentives is going to be double what they estimate, it's not going to be 369 million, maybe it's going to be $750 billion. You know, divide $750 billion by 50 and figure out how much is going to come into your, into your state, and then prioritize that, 40% or half of that comes into these justice communities that you represent. This is a long, big, transformative game, and we should all be at the table helping to shape the rules of it. So briefly, at Fresh Energy, we've been around 30 years. We're going to do exactly what I'm urging you to do. We're going to call on our state agencies. We're going to say we need to be at the table. We're going to say that community organizations representing the frontline communities and the communities of color, the nonprofits that know the housing stock the best, the nonprofits that are, right in the trenches with dealing with housing challenges and energy efficiency work. We want everybody at the table to shape the program. So when we're rolling it out and when it's coming out into our neighborhoods, we have ownership of it. We have high confidence that we're going to get the benefits that the president has promised. So I want to say that, one last thing is that, everybody knows that we're in a incredible election cycle, and we're completely a nonpartisan organization. We don't do partisan politics. But I do want to acknowledge that every single Democrat voted for this bill in the United States Congress, and not one single Republican. So people like to complain about the senator from West Virginia, Senator Manchin, but he's in a state where President Trump won his state by 40 points, and he helped Senator Schumer put this bill together and get 50 votes in the United States Senate with Kamala Harris as the tie-breaking vote. So I just want to acknowledge that a transformative energy revolution is coming, and we're going to be here on the ground in the neighborhoods and the communities helping to shape and make sure these solar panels and these heat pumps and these weatherization improvements and these window upgrades and energy efficiency and car charging in the garage and multifamily and high-rise buildings have access to all these services. We're going to get these services into our community, and we're going to build wealth. We're going to create jobs. We're going to cut carbon, and we're going to decarbonize our buildings. And I just want to tell you how much I admire Marnice for your leadership of the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, and Jacob Surfling for your leadership. This is a moment in history that I'm very, very proud that I could be a small part and come today and give the pep talk. So thank you all for having me.
All right, thank you, Michael, for this overview and the role of Fresh Energy in this work. Let's move to Juan and Mo. Please ground us give us the justice lens on the shortcomings of the following of those bills and laws, and what would be the next steps for the community level and advocates that we all need to know about advocacy. And just what about Justice40? Does it meet the mark for environmental and climate justice communities? And what is the immediate call for action? Juan, please.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for inviting me. I'm really excited to just bring in a justice perspective to this conversation on the Inflation Reduction Act. I acknowledge that this bill has very many good things, and I'm excited to see so many people excited to get some of those benefits to low-income communities, to communities of color. But we do have to acknowledge that a lot of those benefits came at a very high price. And the reason is that the Inflation Reduction Act is also expanding fossil fuel extraction. So in a way, the benefits for some communities have come at the price of sacrificing Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor white communities in the Gulf South, in Alaska, and in other areas where people are fighting fossil fuel infrastructures directly. And that is not how the environmental justice movement or the climate justice movement operates. We operate under the HEMES principles of democratic organizing, under the EJ principles, and no one should be sacrificed. No one should be left behind. That is definitely something that comes from a colonial mentality that, you know, some people can gain things out of the backs of others, and we don't want to replicate that. We see that the IRA is also investing in some dangerous technologies that will keep polluting neighborhoods, such as carbon capture and storage and hydrogen technology, which are unproven and might in fact increase, once again, fossil fuel expansion, which will create pollution in many low-income communities and communities of color. So that is, for me, one of the biggest shortcomings of this bill. Now, in terms of some of the positive sides and some of the investments and tax credits, I do have to say that a majority of them, even though they're called investments, are actually tax credits. So it's not wealth that will stay in our communities. For many of these tax credits, if you don't own taxes, there's no way for you to claim them. And I really, really hope that, in fact, a lot of these programs will benefit low-income communities and the communities that need them the most. We know that historically, there is research in the past with previous residential energy credits in the state of Michigan and in other parts of the country, where actually most energy credits, like almost 60% of energy credits, end up going to the top 20% household income earners. And that's a huge disparity, considering that only 11% of energy credits go to the bottom 60% of households based on income. So it is much, much easier for wealthier families to access these credits. They know how to navigate the system and access rebates and other opportunities. So it's going to take a lot of work for our communities, EJ communities, to actually reap a lot of the benefits from this bill. And that places an extra layer of burden on our communities. And going now into Justice40 and how it connects to the IRA is that this commitment from the Biden administration to deliver 40% of investment benefits, it's not fully reflected in the IRA if you do an accounting of how much money is invested directly as a set aside for disadvantaged communities, for EJ communities. It's only 12% of the total. Industry is getting a lot more from the IRA than our EJ community, so we should not be shortchanged. We have been overburdened by pollution. We are being most affected by climate change-induced disasters. So we should be prioritized. We should at least get 40% of the IRA investments. And something that I always like to clarify as well is that 40% should really be this, not the ceiling. It should really be the floor. The target should not be for our government to get to that 40% mark. It should be to exceed it. And like I said, unfortunately, the IRA, as much as it is talked about as a landmark climate bill, it still only allocates to disadvantaged communities only 12% of the total investments. And I think that I've talked a lot about, like, you know, some of the shortcomings and some of the pitfalls. So what can we do? What is the immediate call to action? I would say that President Biden still has a lot of power in his executive declarations, and he needs to declare a climate emergency. That would actually allow the government to do a lot more in terms of ending the supply of fossil fuels, of oil and natural gas that are polluting many of our communities. I would also say that we need more than tax credits. We really, really need to be calling for direct investments in our communities, especially the ones that are most impacted by pollution. And we need Congress to pass legislation very much like if you have not heard the Environmental Justice for All Act, which is actually helping have true permitting reform, ensuring that our communities have a voice at the table when there are energy projects, when there are any new infrastructure projects that communities of color, low-income communities can access that process and be able to give input on whether they want facilities near their neighborhoods, near their schools or not. That is very, very important because unfortunately, Senator Manchin, as part of negotiating the Inflation Reduction Act, he also put forward a bill called the Energy Independence and Security Act. And while it was touted as a bill to also propose permanent reform to speed up renewables, it also deregulated landmark environmental laws such as NEPA and the Clean Water Act, which actually are tools that our communities use to protect ourselves from pollution. This so-called Energy Independence and Security Act was also restricting community input. And like I said, speeding up the deployment of fossil fuels like the Mountain Valley Pipeline and other pipelines around the country. So we do have to take a more holistic approach when we look at the Inflation Reduction Act and make sure that as we get good things, we're also fighting the bad. We cannot have them be together and accept this kind of like Frankenstein monster that is going to help some people at the expense of others. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Juan. And for everyone, we'll be answering questions after all the panelists give their presentations. So please keep your questions coming in the chat, and will be time for questions afterwards. Thank you very much. Now we move to Amneh. Amneh, please tell us, after we've heard from the panelists here, present to us, what does the following federal laws, the IRA, the Justice40, and infrastructure law mean for building decarbonization? Since we are here, the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. What does that mean for our coalition and for others? What strategies can advocates and organizers do to align efforts? So bring it home to the building decarbonization. And what is the immediate call to action? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Huda, and thanks to all of the previous panelists who helped to stress not just the urgency and the opportunity, but also the shortfalls of these bills. I think it's important to have that context before we kind of wade into the weeds, and we will be wading into the weeds a little bit. So bear with me as we kind of talk some of the more technicalities. I've lifted up just a handful of the provisions in these two laws that are most relevant to building decarbonization, but there are quite a few other programs too. So if you're interested in getting more background information, I'll make sure these slides are available afterwards for you, and also more information on other provisions that you can engage with. So Marnice, I'm not sure, are you sharing your slides? Okay, you're sharing. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so here's, I'm going to speak very briefly about each of the provisions I've pulled out to talk about today. I've pulled out about 4 from each of the 2 bills. And I'll say at the top, I think Jamal and Juan did a really good job of explaining what exactly Justice40 is. It is really a lens through which policies are implemented. It's a way to target the benefits of existing and new programs. And so it's not really a new substantive law on its own. Where necessary, I will uplift the weatherization assistance program is covered by Justice40, and so 40% of benefits at least have to go to disadvantaged communities. I'll make sure to highlight that, but I won't get into the weeds about Justice40 itself. We're going to talk about the infrastructure law from 2021 and the inflation bill from this year. And so I've listed out 4 from each. You can see the list here. And again, apologies for how wordy these slides are about to be, but they really are. They were drafted to serve as a resource for you to refer back to. And so you can just listen to me talk if that's how you absorb information. Next slide, please, Marnice. Cool. So before we talk provisions, let's talk the acronyms. Each of the provisions that I've given you shorthands for will be spelled out on the screen, but these are some really important background terms that you need to know. So Michael talked about state energy offices. That's a really important party that we want to be able to engage with as they're administering these programs. Requests for information and funding opportunity announcements, RFIs and FOAs, are the more immediate ways to engage with the federal agencies on these provisions. And AMI, or area median income, is the way in which different income brackets are set up to target funding amounts. So when Michael talked about the rebates, which I'm excited to talk to you about today, those are targeted by area median incomes, or AMI. Next slide, please, Marnice. All right, let's talk about the Infrastructure Act, or as Jamal explained, it's also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the BIF. It's got a lot of names. I'm going to call it the Infrastructure Law because that's what it was framed as and where most of the funding is targeted. Next slide. Thank you. So the first of the four provisions that I'm going to kind of explain how it relates to building decarbonization is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants. So 3 of these 4 programs I'm going to talk about all flow through the Office of State and Community Energy Programs at the Department of Energy. This is actually a new office at DOE that was kind of, the whole office was reshuffled to kind of house all of the related programs. And so it's the same staff that oversee this program, weatherization, the state energy program. It's the same officials, which hopefully helps to streamline and make accessing the funding easier for the folks who need to access it. So this is a Justice40 covered program, and it is $550 million through DOE in both formula and competitive grants. So formula grants go automatically to the states based on a set formula, and then competitive grants must be applied for. And so those are the opportunities where we have the most sway as advocates in influencing what the plans look like for communities. And so these energy efficiency block grants are for various levels of different governments. So cities, communities, states, territories, tribes can develop their plans to reduce energy use. And so the deadlines for these with the infrastructure law, a lot of the initial deadlines have already passed, but the applications have not opened yet. And so this is one of those programs. The allocation formulas were set in June of this year, and we're thinking the application period will be opening by the end of this year, but that is TBD. So definitely watch your various listservs, the Federal Register if you have notifications on, like a nerd like I am. That's where those application periods will be opening. I see you laughing, Jamal. I know you have them on too. Next slide, please, Marnice. All right, next is the State Energy Program. This is $500 million, also through Department of Energy, also through the same office, and also a Justice40 program. So the State Energy Program is a boost to an existing program. So it's just a new influx of money, but this program has existed for quite a while. And this is a pretty broad pot of funding that states can use for a whole host of different energy reduction programs, but it can be used for building retrofits and weatherization work. And so that's why I'm kind of lifting it up here. The state plan deadline for using these funds is actually in 2 days. And so I'm sure many people on this call have been already involved in state and local efforts to influence state plans. And I've included a link with more guidance on how these plans can be applied for and implemented. And so I think the call to action for this one is just to continue engaging if you're not already engaged, maintain open conversations with your state energy office, and start, pushing for transparency in how these programs are rolled out and holding the officials accountable to make sure that they are meeting the Justice40 promises that this program must adhere to. All right, next slide, please. All right, everyone's favorite, or at least it should be everyone's favorite, in my opinion, the Weatherization Assistance Program. So this is another existing program that just got a new influx of funding through the infrastructure bill last year. This is $3.5 billion, billion with a B, compared to the other programs who were getting in the hundreds of millions. This is also a Justice40 covered program. But as many of you know, the Weatherization Assistance Program entirely targets low-income communities and households that require assistance with retrofitting their homes. And so this is a formula grant program, and states applied for new uses of this funding. The state plan deadline was October 1st. And I know many folks in the states also participated in that process. And I know there were concerns that the quote unquote stakeholder engagement processes were not very transparent. They were not very meaningful. And oftentimes there were only opportunities to engage after the plan had been drafted. And so I understand that was a very frustrating process in many states, but I still do commend you all for your work to influence those plans and hold your state energy offices accountable for using this funding. So props to you. This funding has started rolling out and will continue to roll out until the $3.5 billion is gone. But again, the Weatherization Assistance Program receives regular funding. It is an ongoing program and a chronically underfunded program. So we should be excited that it was addressed in the infrastructure bill. All right, one more slide on IJA. Next slide, please. Great. So the last program I'll uplift from the infrastructure bill as it relates to building decarbonization is the Resilient and Efficient Building Codes Fund. This is $225 million through the Building Technologies Office at DOE. So it is, we believe, a Justice40 program. That was a little bit unclear in my research, but both the Building Technologies Office and the Building Energy Codes program more broadly at DOE are both Justice40 explicitly. So the way this funding should roll out should adhere to those promises of the Justice40 program. This is a competitive grant program, so states and municipalities have to apply for the funding. And the goal here is to help state teams to update or implement new building codes. One of the major hurdles with building codes is that they are incredibly technical and require staff that is knowledgeable and has capacity to really dig through building codes. And so the goal here is to funnel support through Department of Energy, where that technical expertise already lives, to state energy offices to ensure that they are able to update their energy codes when they wish to. But these are competitive grants. So some deadlines to know here: the RFI for this, a request for information, closed in May of this year, and we are expecting the FOA, or the funding opportunity announcement, to open by the end of 2022. We were actually supposed to get it by the end of last month, but that didn't happen. So keep your eyes peeled for when this becomes available. I think the action item here is to utilize your relationships with state and local officials, particularly in cities, I think, that want to update their building codes to become more or approach zero energy. Make sure they know this resource exists. I know I've struggled, or I know when I was working in Maryland, the Maryland Department of Energy was given a really quick turnaround time to update building performance standards or implement building performance standards. And they had like 2 people in their office to do this massive task in the span of a year. And so just make sure that your state and local officials know this funding exists and knows how to access it when it becomes available by the end of the year. All right, that's the infrastructure law for buildings. Again, there are probably more opportunities. Those are just the 4 most important. And now we can talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide, please. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these programs just because we're currently undergoing the big wave of RFIs and opportunities to engage at the agency level. And we're going to start with the rebate programs because they are my personal favorite. I think I do have a bias. Next slide, please, Marnice. So I'm going to give kind of a background on the rebate programs generally before I explain how they're different. So these 2 rebate programs are awarded through state energy offices. Again, you're going to see that name a lot throughout these slides. Oh, I can go to my slides if that's a problem. Nope, there we go. Cool. So they are distributed by the same formula that is used for the state energy program that we just talked about, but they require DOE approval of the state plans by September 2024. And that date is underlined here because it is very important. So we don't have guidance for these rebate programs yet, but once it becomes available, states are going to have to turn around plans pretty quickly and have them approved by 2024. So what that means is that I know these short timelines can be very frustrating because it's more difficult to engage in stakeholder processes. But I think one of the goals with these 2024 deadlines for some of these IRA provisions, and I don't have confirmation about this, this is my political speculation, is they want to make sure this funding is out the doors of these federal agencies before any political turnover. And so keep that in mind. We want to make sure this money is going out to the states and communities that need it as soon as possible while maintaining enough time for meaningful stakeholder engagement. So again, we don't know a lot about these rebate programs beyond what's in the bill yet. We're assuming they will be overseen by the same office that is doing SEP and WAP and all of the various acronyms I talked about under IJA. the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, though that is not confirmed. Oh, okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jamal. Jamal with the details. So it will be overseeing the rebate programs, which is wonderful because they already have the expertise and relationships with state energy offices that will likely be overseeing the rebates at the state level. Really, really important here, and to kind of uplift something Juan was talking about just before this, the tax credits, which I will not be talking about today, are not super accessible or helpful to the communities that we really want to be advocating for in these spaces. These rebates are point of sale rebates. So they bring down the cost of appliances and other upgrades at the point of sale. You don't have to wait a year to get the money back on your taxes, if you even get money back on your taxes, and they really they don't do 100% in some cases. They will not bring the cost down to zero like we would like them for them to, but they do help bring down the costs and kind of lower that upfront cost hurdle that many communities will be struggling with as they try to attempt this transition to weatherizing and electrifying their homes. Because these rebate programs are income targeted to different income levels, and they are point of sale rebates, that means that there will likely be, or there will have to be some kind of income verification at the point of sale. And so I'm going to highlight some issue areas to keep in mind as we're advocating on these rebate programs, but this is going to be one of the first major hurdles, is ensuring that this income verification requirement is not overly burdensome when consumers and homeowners and low-income communities try to access these programs. The final point I'll note here in the kind of overview slide is that the two rebates cannot be combined with each other, which I know is frustrating because they do a lot of the same work, but they can likely be combined with other programs like tax credits or like other funding streams. And so I think one of the first issues that we're researching as advocates and that we're pressing Department of Energy to look into is how exactly these can be combined to maximize the benefits and to maximize savings for households. So as y'all know, weatherization is not enough to complete a lot of these projects. And so how can we combine the different projects to kind of get a comprehensive project done, right? All right, so, and yes, clarify that they can't be combined for the same appliance, but they can be used in the same project. So you can't use like homes rebate for the same breaker box that you're using a HERE update for, or rebate for, but you can likely use like a homes rebate for a breaker box and a HERE rebate for a heat pump in the same project, for example. All right, next slide, let's talk about homes. All right, so homes, the acronym is spelled out for you here, but we just call it HOMES or the efficiency rebates compared to the electrification rebates under here. So HOMES is $4.3 billion, billion with a B, administered by Department of Energy. These rebates run through 2031, though I did mention on the last slide, they have to be approved by DOE by 2024, September 2024. So these are 4.3 billion for energy performance-based rebates. And so we're still waiting for guidance to understand exactly what that's going to look like, but it essentially means you're going to model out the energy savings of a specific project or a retrofit project, and then the amount of rebate is based on the projected savings. And so it gets pretty technical, but just I put out some examples of like what the savings will look like for different energy reduction projects. And so that's kind of spelled out for you here. It is a bit complicated. I'll admit I don't even totally understand how that works, but it's important to know here, HOMES is not entirely a low-income program, but the rebates double for low-income households. And so you'll see an example here. You can get up to $8,000 in rebates for low-income households under the HOMES program. And then one kind of red flag that I have with this program, and as folks have been talking about throughout this panel, there's no sunset date for the fossil fuel projects. And so you could theoretically use HOMES rebates for gas appliances like gas furnaces and gas water heaters. And because this program runs through 2031, we really don't want any household, but particularly low-income households, to be making themselves beholden to the gas system. In 2031, these appliances have like 20-year lifespans sometimes. And so we want to be very careful when we're advocating about these programs to press for electrification when possible and when practical, because becoming beholden to the gas system in 2031 is a really dangerous place to be. And so next slide, please. We can talk about HERE, which is a little bit more uplifting. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the HERE rebates, and I'm doing my best to call them HERE and not HERA, but it just sounds better in my head. So I'll be better about that. But this is $4.5 billion administered by DOE, also through 2031. And this is for, or what we refer to as the electrification rebates, because it is very explicitly for electrification projects. And so you can see the project cost covered here. The income targeting is a little bit different with this program. You'll see that the project costs can cover up to 100% for households that are below 80% of AMI, or area median income, as I kind of explained at the beginning. And then 50% of the project costs for households that are between 80% and 150% of AMI. And so this rebate program does target low income and moderate income households specifically. And it even includes that multifamily buildings can qualify if greater than or equal to 50% of all of the occupants in the building fall within these income categories. So if they're low or moderate income. And then one other special piece of this rebate program that I'm really excited about is, I know someone mentioned earlier that when you call a contractor, I think it was Michael, when you call a contractor, they don't know what a heat pump water heater is sometimes. And so one of the exciting provisions in this program is that there's incentives directly for contractors to kind of press them to start recommending electrification upgrades. So contractors can get up to $500 in incentives to start recommending appliances like heat pumps. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so another piece that I'll uplift here, it's not exactly under the rebates, but I think it's an important conversation to be having as we're thinking of implementation. There is a contractor training grant program. It is $200 million for energy efficiency and electrification contractor training. This is a pretty small number when you consider like just the scope of this issue. We could make heat pumps free, and tomorrow there still will not be enough people to install them in every home, right? So I think an action item here will be to start thinking creatively about how we can supplement this funding, potentially use this funding to kickstart a new contractor training program, and then supplement this program with perhaps the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund or some EJ block grants that I'm going to round out this presentation talking about. But an important piece, it was considered in the drafting of the legislation. Folks are clearly aware that this is a problem, but the dollar figure on this contractor training piece does not really reflect the scale of the need here. And so it's an important piece to be thinking about as we're looking towards implementation and advocacy around these rebate programs. Oh, and just a fun fact on the contractor training, the homes rebates was initially called Hope for Homes. And this is the Hope piece, which I really liked that framing when they were drafting these provisions. Next slide, please. All right, I'll be quick here because you can dig into this when you have the slides in front of you, and I'm cognizant that I'm running over time. But in the short term, engagement on these rebate programs looks like advocacy at DOE as they're crafting the initial round of guidance, and there will be some listening sessions at the end of this year and very early next year, and we'll make sure that the Midwest Building Decarb listserv has all of that information as the opportunities become available. There's also a federal coalition space that some folks on this call are on, where we have more regular conversations about implementation and about these RFIs and FOAs and other acronyms. And so if you're interested in engaging more directly at the federal level in the short term, that's totally an option. In the long term, I will uplift a point that Michael made earlier. It's really important to start developing relationships with your state energy offices. They are the officials that will be overseeing a lot of these programs. And so the more closely you can work with them now, the more they'll trust you and rely on you when it comes time to ensure this funding is reaching the right people. And you can influence the way these plans are drafted very early on. And that's really important. They really have a lot of power in the coming months and years. And so that's a really important lifeline for our advocacy. I'll also say in the long term, it's important not just to work with the officials, but also the communities that need to access this funding. I think community awareness about all of these new funding opportunities is really key to making sure the funds are utilized properly. It's one thing to have the money out the door, it's another thing to have it in people's hands. And so that's a really important piece as well that I think folks in this space are really primed to do well. And then I've listed some issues to consider. These are not the only problems with these programs, but just some that have come up in early conversations. The point of sale income verification, that could be a massive hurdle, and we want to make sure we smooth that out as much as possible. The use of rebates for gas appliances, when possible, we should be trying to advocate against that. And then again, these programs are not enough to get the job done, right? This is a massive project we're undertaking together. And so identifying ways that we can stack and braid, layer, whatever word you want to use, these new rebates with existing federal, state, local, and utility programs that do similar work to ensure that we're getting the maximum benefits for households. All right, that's my piece on rebates. I hope I sold them to you. There's more to come on this for sure. Next slide, please. All right, this one's also exciting. We can go to the next slide too. So the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants, this is switching gears just a little bit. This is through EPA, $3 billion through the Environmental Protection Agency to fund environmental and climate justice community projects. And so eligible recipients include community-based nonprofits, partnerships of community-based nonprofits, or partnerships of these groups with smaller like tribal governments, local governments, or universities, which is, I think, a really exciting opportunity. Next slide, please. So this grant program is pretty broad. You could use it for almost anything that meets the guidelines of the program, anything that reduces greenhouse gas emissions or air pollution in disadvantaged communities is basically a green light. We don't have guidance yet, but we're hoping that's how the program works. You can see here the list of eligible projects is super broad. I've bolded the ones that are directly related to building decarb, but I know that many folks in this space do a lot of other work too. And so it's an exciting opportunity for maybe cross-sector programs, comprehensive community projects, and the like. I'll say that it's exciting that this, I've underlined it here, this funding can be used for workforce development in communities where that's a priority. And then it can also be used to reduce indoor air pollution. And so there are ways this funding could possibly be used in the school air pollution programs or in gas stove replacement programs. The opportunities are pretty endless here, which is exciting and a little bit overwhelming, I'll admit. Next slide, please. Cool. And so because the opportunities are almost endless, it'd be great to have like a list of go-to programs that have worked in the past for communities. And so we're thinking that might be one of the ways we can support community partners who are looking to utilize this funding, is just providing like some example projects that would meet the guidelines. And so the EPA actually has a list and a map of previous EJ grants that they've given. And there are also other programs that we've linked here on the slide. And there's more information in the notes under the slide when you're reviewing them afterwards too. Next slide, please. Yes, and more resources. I mentioned earlier that the grant application process itself is pretty burdensome and requires a lot of knowledge and time. And so I've listed here some opportunities through EPA to learn more about the grant process, and also DOE, because DOE is going to be administering a lot of money coming soon, also has done a webinar recently that really dug into the basics of how to apply for a competitive grant. And it was really helpful. And that is all linked in the slide, and there's more notes in the notes under the slides. Are folks seeing the slides I'm seeing in chat? Some folks might not be seeing the details. Of course, I'll be sending these out around with Marnice and the Fresh Energy folks afterwards too. Okay, some folks are seeing the slides. Perfect. Yes, and we can go to the next slide too. All right, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I hope y'all are hanging in here. I know this is a lot of information. I'm doing my best to parse it down for you. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is, we only got one more after this, I promise. This is one of the biggest pots of funding under the IRA. It is $27 billion to facilitate, quote, the rapid deployment of low and zero emissions technology through innovative financing. I've been referring to this as the Green Bank. It's not exactly a green bank, but there are some very similarly named provisions in the IRA. So it's just a shorthand that we've been using to talk about this program. And you can see the funding breakdown in the ways that it runs through different financing entities. The goal here is really to get this money from EPA to state and local green banks and directly to projects that need to be funded. Similar to the EJ block grants, the opportunities here are pretty endless. Almost anything that reduces greenhouse gas emissions is almost fair game. Like we're still waiting for guidance here, but this is an opportunity to not just get creative with projects, but also to uplift and kind of play matchmaker between community partners who have had projects that they've wanted to do for a long time, but maybe just have lacked funding. We can connect them now with the funding source that is intentionally written to help and uplift those programs. And so this is an exciting opportunity, I think, especially for folks in this space who have those really strong partnerships with community organizations or might yourselves have ideas for how this funding can be used. And so Definitely watch the space. Next slide, please, for the deadlines to watch out for here. So EPA has to start giving this money out by February of next year, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. And all of it has to be obligated by EPA. So it has to be out of EPA's hands by September 2024. So that's a very quick turnaround again. But just because it has to be out of EPA's hands doesn't mean it has to be spent on a project. It can be sitting with state and local green banks, waiting to be used by communities. And so that's kind of where we're the direction we're heading in. It just has to be out the door, but it can be ready to be used by state and local green banks. And I'm not an expert on community financing or green banks. And so that might also be a good opportunity or next step is we should all become not experts, but familiar with how these work, because they're going to be one of the main entities that are going to be overseeing this funding alongside the state energy offices. I'll note that the RFI, or Request for Opportunity, is currently live on EPA's website and in the Federal Register, and it closes on December 5th. And so there is a coalition of federal advocates that is engaging on this. There are actually multiple different coalitions in different issue areas because as it's such a broad program, it's not just for buildings. It can certainly be used for building projects, but it can be used for a lot of things. And so there are a lot of really brilliant people engaging on this at the federal level if you're interested, or if you'd rather wait until the money is ready to be spent or applied for. That's also an opportunity. You can do some early work engaging community partners who might want to access the funding now. All right, I think we have one more slide. Yes, we do. All right, last program, and then I'll stop talking. We can answer some questions. All right, next slide, please. Cool. Okay, so the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. I believe this is the only specific funding for affordable housing buildings in the entire IRA, so it's really important that it's done right. This is $1 billion administered by Department of Housing and Urban Development through September 2028. I've listed out the eligible uses and entities who can apply for this, but it really is the goal is to improve here at the top, that's the tagline, improve energy efficiency, water efficiency, or climate resilience of affordable housing. And so again, pretty broad. You can do a lot of things with this funding. And it's $1 billion is nothing to scoff at, but again, it's only a drop in the bucket of the projects that we're looking to undertake together. So it's a really exciting first step, I think. And I'll also say that this is at the end because the RFI has already closed. It was very quick, and I know that that's a problem for a lot of folks who, you know, not everyone is an expert in the space, but might want to weigh in. And so there were problems with the 1 month turnaround, I think. I think it opened late September, so really quick, and then closed about 2 weeks ago or about a week ago. So this opportunity has closed. I think next step here is guidance from Housing and Urban Development. And again, an action item you can do here is you know, just talk with your community partners, folks in the affordable housing advocacy space, make sure they know this money exists and make sure that they have the resources to advocate on behalf of their communities when it comes time to get these projects underway. Whew. All right, I think that was the last program. Next slide, and we can do questions. Woo, we did it.
All right. Amneh, in the chat, it's really, people are thanking you for this really analysis that we all need to take it slowly and gradually to really understand what's going on. Unbelievable for me. I'm like, whoa, what, I'm missing a lot here, and I'm keeping up with things, but of course, as a small group, we cannot do that. But this is like a lot that I feel that I'm missing. Can you believe that? Like, I'm really feeling that I'm missing a lot, and I'm very engaged. So what about those who are not? I mean, just that's where I'm at this point. But thank you very much for this analysis. And yeah, let's go to the questions here. So there's so many in the for everyone. So we start here with Sheila at the very beginning. She was asking about, do you have a template that each state can use to make this happen? Shovel ready. And I don't know where Sheila is at this point after all this information, but that's what the first question that we had today. So if anyone
I'm still here, Huda. Thank you so much for asking my question. Amina, we're going to get you some oxygen. I know that was a lot. I couldn't even keep up. And so we need Amina to either have her own workshop but that was a lot of information. It sounds like our partners are the city, the state, the government. We can't apply for these dollars that she's referring to as grassroots organizations. So my question is, who is they? Who are the people that we need to be reaching out to make sure that we can apply for these dollars? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. And I might bounce this over to Jamal too, because it's a question that we've been dealing with. I think just who is the eligible entities for each program. So for some, you're right, it is city, state, local governments, tribes, sometimes universities even, but there are some funding opportunities for community-based nonprofits. So I think that will become clear as we get guidance from the agencies, but there will be opportunities, I think, for nonprofits to engage, specifically for some of the environmental justice block grant opportunities and the greenhouse gas reduction fund. If you or your partners are involved in any kind of direct project work or contracting work or workforce development work even, because that's covered by a lot of these programs, I think there will be opportunities for y'all to apply or to help your partners apply for the funding. And so we'll try to make that clear. There will be opportunities. I think your question more specifically asked for like templates that states can use. We are working, that's one of the deliverables I think some federal advocates are working to get done is just like model language that you can use to apply for some of these programs, both model language for community-based nonprofits to apply and model language for state energy offices to apply for some of the rebate programs and other work. And so that is one of the deliverables we're hoping to get done. That's probably a little further down the line. Right now, we're really just engaging in conversation with the agencies, but hear your question and definitely something that's a priority, I think.
All right, thank you. And I think here Juan has answered Robin's question. Robin had asked about what source of information that he referred to regarding the Justice40 in the IRA, and he put in the Just Solution Collective as an analysis that they've done, and 100% or 12% or so that's really going directly to disadvantaged communities according to their analysis. So Juan, you want to say anything there?
Yeah, I just want to briefly add, I really appreciated Amneh's presentation because it talked a lot about the really good opportunities that a lot of the programs from the IRA have, but also some of the shortcomings that we from frontline communities, grassroots organizations, we really have to watch out for, right? Like, we need to ensure that the money is actually going to low-income communities. I was also really excited to hear that Jamal was mentioning that they're going to submit comments to ensure that there are set-asides for some of the programs that don't have specific allocations for low-income households. And we really, as advocates, my coalition is an advocacy organization, so we really need to keep pushing so that the money really flows to the communities that will need them the most. Really important to also know like those deadlines when the money needs to be spent by. We really know that there is a lot of money coming, and it can be overwhelming for our communities, for our organizations. So there's going to be a lot of work. So yeah, just really an appreciation for all the panelists. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And then there was back and forth chat between Robin and Jamal. And thank you, Jamal, for stepping in there. So Jamal, would you like to answer Robin's questions here, or give us just and then you're going to continue on with her afterwards, but just for now, anything you want to?
Yes, I mean, I can just sort of describe, Robin, if you're on too, maybe we could just like give an overview of what that back and forth was about. The issue of like free ridership has to do with the fact that many utilities as a result of efficiency, or was it energy efficiency resource standards, which require some utilities to reduce energy consumption by a certain percentage every year. They are tracked based on the investments that they make in qualifying energy consumption reduction activities. So if you install, if you do weatherization, install insulation, obviously it's going to take less energy to heat and cool your home, which results in energy consumption reduction. The concern here is with these other incentives available through the federal government, that utilities could claim some of those savings that they aren't directly contributing to with their investments, their resources, which is a concern. And I also, what I had mentioned in the chat is the fact that, and this is an issue with the weatherization program as well, DOE is required to track the energy savings that weatherization investments result in. So if a utility and then DOE are both pouring money into the same home and they both have to claim the savings, there's a limit in how much each program can claim, because there's only but so much that can be done. So with the addition of these new resources, the issue is whether or not there's going to be a requirement that these new resources from the Inflation Reduction Act can be leveraged with utility funding or with DOE funding in order to lead to maybe deeper retrofits, I guess more quality retrofits, but that also could result in utilities claiming additional savings because their money is going towards a home that is also receiving other resources to retrofit. It's a complicated situation, but Robin, do you want to?
Yeah,
yeah.
I think there's the flip side of that. I've actually heard concern less in that direction, that they would claim things that aren't actually attributable to the utility program, than this, which is that utilities might be motivated to pull back their incentive, their existing incentives for these things, out of fear that their evaluation paradigm, regime would not recognize the savings because they're influenced by the federal rebates and not the program. Because the test within the utility program is essentially to prove that utility program influenced the savings. So to the extent that risk is real or not, I think is a question that's out there. But it seems like there could be something we could do to mitigate that risk. Just say, in this special time, how about if we have evaluation regimes not do that? Don't penalize the programs, because the idea here is to actually, but I just haven't heard anything take any shape around that. But the concern I've heard expressed is that utilities might be motivated to pull back what they're already offering.
Yeah, and I see Amneh has her hand up too. I guess at this point I'm less concerned because a lot of these states have requirements that utilities have to meet. But Amneh, what do you think?
Yeah, I would just say, I think one solution that some of the attorneys I work with at Sierra Club have been looking to is utilities have to be involved, I think, in the conversations about how these programs are rolling out. And so I think it makes sense to have maybe not formal dockets before public service commissions, but some kind of process for utilities to lay out what their plan is for the rollout of these programs. And so one of the questions that could be addressed is just how we're measuring the benefits. And so that's certainly one question, but there are so many questions. They are someone, I did not mention this in any of my slides, but they're a really crucial party here. It's not just state energy offices and community nonprofits. It's utilities, right? They have a lot of programs already that do some of this work. And so they have to be a part of that conversation early on. And it needs to be done in a way that's transparent and where they can be held accountable. And so that's why we're kind of leaning towards public service commission dockets, understanding that we're not going to get that in every state. But I think California, Michigan, I think maybe Nevada, DC, they are popping up in some places. And so we are looking to engage in those forums, but again, understanding that it sometimes does require legal expertise to engage there. And so trying to make it more transparent for the public.
Yeah, it's also the place where consumers are most familiar with equipment rebating, right? So the opportunity for a utility to say oh, and there's this tax credit, and oh, and there's this rebate program, has you can get a lot of scale out of socializing the ideas there too. So I think you're spot on and involving the utilities in that way.
All right, thank you. And then Shannon here had a question. Is anyone compiling examples of some of these grants funding opportunities, especially when the topics are broad? And Jamal had answered there. Anything, Shannon, you wanna say? If you're there.
No, that's it. I just I work with a lot of municipal areas that might not be able to envision what is possible with some of these funds, and so it might be nice to have some kind of helpful guide that kind of illuminates what might be possible, what they could apply some of these funds to get them to think more creatively.
Yeah, for sure. So what Amneh was mentioning is the Federal Electrification Policy Coalition. It's the coalition that I facilitate with Amneh. Happy to have Amneh as a great resource. And Marnice and Jacob from Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition also participate. And that coalition has working groups on all of these various provisions that Amneh mentioned for the Inflation Reduction Act, and are organizing to comment on each of them to make sure that we're getting that our thoughts and concerns are voiced, and that we're making sure that from the get-go, each of these provisions and resources is as accessible as it possibly can be. And Marnice actually is co-leading a working group on the EPA's schools program, which I don't think we mentioned here. But we also have a working group led by folks at WeAct on the environmental and climate justice block grants that Amneh mentioned. That's the broad pot of funding that can be used for anything, as long as it is reducing greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And I say all that to say, one of the ideas that we came up with was a list of potential projects that community organizations can choose from if it would be helpful. Obviously, some will have their own ideas and will have projects that they've been working on for some time. But for those that don't have ideas and would like some ideas, we're thinking about putting together a list of what those ideas can look like in preparation for that grant opportunity. So that is something that we can share out when it's ready. And but yeah, I think I have a question if I can take that privilege. It would be awesome to hear which of the provisions, the programs that you've heard, are you like most interested in and most excited about, and would like to engage more in. One thing that Amneh and I have been talking about is how can we engage more environmental justice communities or in community-based organizations at the forefront of the design of these programs. So at the federal level. And Juan, I'm really glad that you're working with, that you're in community with Just Solutions Collective. Sylvia has been working with us as well to help develop recommendations on these various provisions. But we're trying to do that, and actually tomorrow have a high-level meeting, the first of hopefully many, to dive deeper into what all of these programs are, and hopefully get ahead of some of these timelines so that we can ensure that our voices are heard and make sure that we're participating in the process. That meeting tomorrow is at noon. If you're interested, feel free to email me